Tip number 1 is that we aim for 18. Whether you're recording drums, keyboards, vocals, anything at all, they need headroom so that you're not clipping your signal. If you aim for about -18 on your metering, you should be good. Tip number 2 is that we remove noise. Noise can be anything that's in your environment that's going to impact your recordings and your production. That could be the fan noise of your computer, could be the air conditioning in your house or your apartment. Anything that's going to cause issues with your recording, it's best to turn those off as soon as possible. Tip number 3 is that you record the DI. Guitar players and bass players, for some reason we don't like using direct boxes a whole lot, but what a direct box allows us to do is to split the signal. So we can go straight to our audio interface with a direct signal, and then you can use your guitar pedals or your guitar amp, you can mic it up, get whatever you need to in the recording process, but if you have a DI, it's gonna save you in the long run, especially if you have problems later on in the mix. Tip number 4 is that you tune. And I don't mean just tuning guitars, I also mean tuning your drum set. The TuneBot is something I've used on this channel for years and years. I love using the TuneBot because it works just like guitar tuners. You clip it onto the side of the drums, you can tune the drums to a specific frequency that you really like, you can save your presets, saves you a lot of time, and you don't want to have to worry about messing with something out of tune when you go to mix. Tip number 5 is that you make use of direct monitoring. By direct monitoring, most audio interfaces are going to give you an option that you can monitor the signal coming straight out of the audio interface rather than software monitoring. So software monitoring on Studio One is usually that blue speaker icon you see next to the tracks. This can be good, but if your computer is not powerful enough, it's going to have a lot of latency. So the direct monitoring that your audio interface affords you is usually going to be a lot better than software monitoring making its loop back. Tip number 6 is that you set your sample rate to 48 kilohertz. This is quite controversial and you may disagree with me, that's totally fine. 96 kilohertz would be ideal, but most people's computers might struggle to handle 96 kilohertz. It's going to make your plugins work a little bit harder, and at the end of the day, the perceivable difference is very negligible. I don't know many people that could distinguish a 96 kilohertz audio file from a 48 kilohertz audio file. So stick with 48 for a while, and then as you journey on and you want to just experiment, you can keep moving it up as high as you want. Tip number 7 is that you master your stock plugins. Most DAWs like Presonus Studio One and Pro Tools, Logic, they all come with built-in plugins. And for some reason, we just feel like they're not good enough. So you get on this rabbit trail of spending a lot of money on plugins, when at the end of the day, you just need to learn how to use the compressor, the EQ, and maybe a reverb plugin for now. Tip number 8 is that you prioritize instrument purchases over software purchases. This is also controversial because this is just my personal opinion. Every regret I've had related to the studio kind of stuff is that I've sold instruments or I've purchased software. Whenever I have an instrument, I like having that instrument available because you never know what song you're gonna wish that you had that certain guitar or that certain pedal or that certain amp or drum set. But when it comes to software, a lot of times we end up forgetting that we even have the software, or the software doesn't transfer when we have to update our operating system or our DAW. So especially early on, prioritize instruments and tangible things over the software if you can. Tip number 9 is that you make use of external SSDs. So solid state drives that can be plugged into your computer are great, especially if you're in a situation where you're moving from place to place. So sometimes I like to take sessions with me to work, or I like to use them on my laptop when I'm in the living room. I don't want to be confined to one space. So rather than recording to my internal PC's drive, I record to an external SSD that can be brought with me from place to place. Tip number 10 is that you make use of the loop function. So Presonus Studio One certainly has a loop function. Logic, Pro Tools, they're all gonna have loops as well. But if you're practicing and trying to learn what part you're gonna record on a certain thing, use the loop region to play over and over again. You can play different parts, experiment around. And on Presonus Studio One, if you hit the record button while you're practicing through a loop, it will actually record layers every time the loop passes around. So then you can select what layer of the performance you want to keep. Tip number 11 is that you make use of the auto punch function. So in Presonus Studio One, if I go to record a track and there's only a little section that I messed up, maybe on a drum fill, I need to redo something, it's better to auto punch or punch in that one specific section rather than trying to record the entire song from beginning to end. Now you will have bragging rights, and it is pretty cool to tell somebody, I did this all in one take, but most people really don't care if you did it all in one take. They just want to know, does it sound good? So save some time, make use of auto punch. I have a video on my channel you can check out about how to use the auto punch function. I'll put it in the description of this video. Tip number 12 is that you copy the greats. By copying the greats, this could come down to whether you're into recording or mixing or mastering. Sometimes it's cool to drop in a session or drop in an audio file of someone else's song and then you try to recreate it at home. So if you're a musician, you want to nail a certain guitar tone, take the MP3 or the WAV file, drop it into your DAW, and then try to play along with your guitar. Try to match tones if you can. If you're into mixing or want to do more of the production side, you can try to mix a session so that it sounds more like somebody that was a professional when they did it, so that you can find out how do you stand up next to the pros. Tip number 13 is that you quantize. If you're not quantizing in the year 2024, or at least learn how to quantize in 2024, it's a valuable skill, especially if you're using loops or software-based MIDI instruments. You want to know how to quantize. On Presonus Studio One, it's pretty easy. You just hit the Q key on your keyboard and you can mess with the parameters so that you can lock things to the 8th note, the quarter note, 16th note, and so forth. Number 14 is pretty specific to Presonus Studio One, but make use of FX tracks. So FX tracks like reverb, delay, you can make an FX track whatever you want it to be, but specifically with reverb, I can make an FX track so that I can send my tracks to that reverb rather than having to make a reverb plugin on every single one of my tracks or buses, okay? This is gonna save you some processing power in your computer. If you just have a reverb effects track, like a hall or a chamber, have a delay effects track, and then from each of your individual tracks, send a copy over to that effects track, and then you can output to your mix bus if you want. It'll save you some processing, and it's just a little cleaner when you're looking at a session. Tip number 15 is color grade. So your session can look pretty bland, or you don't want the computer to tell you what color your tracks should be. So pick a color scheme and stick to it. I like to make my drums red, basses are blue, pianos are purple, guitars are green, and so forth. Try to come up with a color scheme. It's gonna help you when you're opening session to session that you know what things look like based on the color. Number 16 is that you get a music stand. Music stands aren't as common as they used to be. Most of the time we're just using it to prop up our laptops, but specifically if you're a singer, vocalist, or a guitar player and you want to have somewhere to put your chord chart, you want to have somewhere to put your lyrics or your iPad, get yourself a music stand. Now they make small ones that have a low profile that you can clamp onto the boom stand. I use this one all the time in my room as well when I'm recording. Tip number 17 is that you get a power conditioner. There are so many different types of power conditioners out there. I use the Furman ones that are pretty common all over the place. These are basically like surge protectors. They're not gonna do anything magical to your audio, but what it does is it helps with a lot of grounding issues. If you can have as many things as possible in your studio plugged into one power conditioner, you don't have to worry about ground loops and humming coming from them. Blackline Audio also have some new power conditioners. I'm using one in my studio now, and it's pretty neat because it has some of the switching off and switching on. It kind of goes in series. One thing goes after the other, and it's got certain outlets for certain things like digital and analog equipment. Tip number 18 is that you use airplane mode. Switch your phone to airplane mode, not only because it can mess up some of your sessions in the studio, it can be distracting, but also if you're using some wireless technology, a lot of times getting text messages, phone calls, or browsing the web on your phone can cause some interference, pops, clicks, alien kind of sounds, so you don't want to have any of that. Switch it to airplane mode and you might be surprised at how much cleaner and quieter things sound in your studio. Number 19 is that you use less plugins. Coming from a minimalist, I really don't like putting 20, 30 plugins on a track or a bus when I go to mix, because what that tells me is once you get beyond 5 or 6 plugins on your track, you probably just don't like the sound of the performance or the tone that you got from your guitar amp. You probably need to just redo the take or do something different. Try to stick to less plugins and you'll be surprised at how much cleaner your mixes will sound. Tip number 20 is that we make use of gain staging. Gain staging is where we set all of our tracks at the same threshold or volume. So I'm always gonna aim for -18, whether that's a snare drum, a female vocal, someone whispering, someone talking. I all want it to be at -18 at the start, so that when I start moving faders, the faders actually mean something. So aim for -18 with all of your tracks. That will give you some good gain staging to start with. Then when you move your faders around, it'll actually make sense. Tip number 21 is LCR, or left, center, right panning. This is kind of an old school mentality of, rather than trying to pan stuff a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, you eliminate those variables and you just say stuff can either go all the way to the left, all the way to the right, or right down the middle, and there is no in between. Something you may want to try out on your next mix. It's not for everybody, but for me, it's just a simple way of mixing that commit to fully to the left, fully to the right, or in the middle. Tip number 22 is all about closed and open back headphones. Closed back headphones are going to isolate the sound to inside your head. So if you're a singer and you've got closed back headphones, it essentially works like gun mufflers. You're trying to keep the sound from leaving. We don't want our microphone to be able to hear the click track and things that the singer is listening to. We want it to be closed off. So get a pair of closed back headphones. Open back headphones are generally a little bit better for mixing and mastering work because it just has a more natural feel to them. I've got a pair of both. I'll wear the closed back ones when I'm recording, then use the open back ones for mixing. Which brings me to tip number 23, which is all about in-ear monitors. In-ear monitors really came around for people that are performing live, like at churches or performing on stage. In-ear monitors are gonna be just like closed back headphones, but they go further into your ears. In-ear monitors can get quite expensive, and it does matter how many drivers you have. You can also get them custom molded to your ears, but check out in-ear monitors. If you already have your monitoring situation figured out, get a pair of in-ears. Shure makes some that are single drivers, and I use them here on this channel when I'm making videos. They are good enough just for you to get through if you're doing a video or working on demos. Tip number 24 is that you take breaks. Now this is not about you're physically able to sit and mix for long periods of time, but your ears and your brain, you need to be able to reset every now and then. So take a break, step away from the computer. And a lot of times people will go to the sink. You can turn on some running water and kind of put your head down and just listen to the sound of the running water. It's kind of like a white noise effect where it kind of resets your ears. You can start to think that stuff sounds really good, and then you realize you've been mixing for 2 hours and it doesn't sound good at all. So take a break, not only for your physicalness, but also just for your ears to reset. Tip number 25 is that you arrange your tracks. Presonus Studio One has an arranger view. I've made a video on my channel all about it. I like arranging my songs as soon as possible so that I know where the chorus is, I know where the bridge is, I know how many instrumentals we're gonna be doing. It's nice to have stuff laid out in an arrangement as soon as possible. We're halfway there. If you hung in with me this whole time, please hit the like and subscribe button. Tip number 26 is that you record a demo. Now, a demo doesn't have to be the entire song, but a lot of times what we'll do is if my wife writes a song, I'll have her sing something and I'll strum the guitar, and we'll just have one audio track. There should be one microphone we put in the room. All I want to do in this process is turn on a click track. I want to play some chords and have my wife sing into the microphone for as much of the song as possible. If you don't have your songs fully fleshed out, you definitely need to have some sort of demo. Otherwise, you're kind of aimlessly navigating this song session, not sure what it's going to end up being. So as soon as you can get a demo track, it doesn't have to be part of the finished song. You can just delete the file or mute it entirely. Get yourself a demo so that you have somewhere to aim for. Number 27 is all about the low cut or the high pass filter. So a low cut or high pass filter is pretty much going to be on every single track that you mix with. That's because the human voice, the guitars, especially acoustic guitars, they're not meant to produce frequencies below like 80 hertz. There are certain frequencies where like it's going to put more strain on the speaker system trying to produce a 20 hertz or 30 hertz signal. You can give yourself some headroom and you'll be able to get a lot louder tracks if you use high pass filters on a lot of tracks. Your bass guitar, your drums, if you're using 808s or some sort of samples, you probably don't want to put high pass filters on those, but try to put it on things that are in that mid-range or especially treble frequency bound instruments like tambourines. There's no reason for them to have 100 hertz. Just roll those off with a high pass filter. Number 28 is all about the mid-range. When you're making EQ moves, be very careful about messing with the mid-range because the mid-range, everything from like 200 hertz up to 1000 hertz, This is what identifies the character of the instrument or the voice that you're using. In fact, electric guitars, this is their happy place. So any moves that you make on the EQ, it's going to dramatically affect things like the human voice, keyboards, guitars, synthesizers. Try to prioritize leaving the mid-range alone unless you hear something egregious that's muddy. Leave your mid-range alone. Try to address the things that are in the treble and bass frequencies first, and then go to the mid-range to make your tweaks. Number 29, you should invest in timeless gear. And by timeless gear, these are the things that people have been talking about forever. So when I say timeless gear with microphones, you probably think of the Shure SM57. The Shure SM57 has been around for decades. People keep purchasing it over and over and over again. It's because it works. So if you're in a pinch and you don't have a big budget to spend on studio equipment, always go for the things that people have been talking about and using for decades first, and then you can start experimenting with some of the newer brands out there. Tip number 30 is that you pursue becoming a tech. Now, a tech can mean different things. It could be, if you're somebody that records and mixes drums mainly, then maybe you should become a drum tech. Somebody that knows the ins and outs of the instrument. You know how to change heads. You know how to tune the instrument. On a bass guitar or on an electric guitar, do you know how to switch out a nut? Do you know how to change strings on the guitar? It doesn't mean you need to learn these things as soon as possible, but it's going to make you invaluable, especially in your session. If you know how to set things up, get the intonation right. There's so many different areas of becoming a tech, like if you have a microphone cable that goes bad, can you fix that microphone cable? That'll make you invaluable in the studio. Tip number 31 is that when you're recording, if you feel like the tracks are too loud and you can't hear yourself singing or playing on top of the track, go to the main fader and turn it down to -12. By doing this, you're giving yourself a fighting chance because most likely the tracks that you're recording, if you're recording a vocal or something like that, it's not going to sound as loud as the mixed tracks already are. So you can quickly just go to the main fader, turn it down -12, and then in your headphones, you'll be able to hear more of your voice and less of the audio tracks. Number 32, use cloud storage. So cloud storage can involve so many different things. Personally, I use a lot of Google Drive just because I'm using YouTube a whole lot. Their plans are very affordable. I think it's like $2 or $3 a month and you get like a terabyte of storage. Dropbox is pretty good. Dropbox seemed to run out of storage a lot faster than some of the others, but by cloud storage, every time you're exporting a file or you need to back up a session, have some sort of cloud servicing that you can make use of so that if something does happen to your computer or your sessions, you've got a backup version on the cloud. Tip number 33 is that you cut, compress, and boost. So a lot of times when I'm mixing a track, the first thing I want to think about is I put an EQ plugin on it and I want to think, what are the frequencies that need to be cut? These are usually problematic things that could have come up during recording. If it's an acoustic guitar that has something really brittle at the top end, okay, I need to cut some of those frequencies because they're problematic. So you cut the problems. Then I'll add a compressor that kind of just smooths out the dynamics of whatever the track is. And then what I want to do is boost. So the boosting process is putting an EQ or something on there that's going to take the things that I like about the track and just give me more of the good stuff. So cut, compress, and boost. Tip number 34 is don't be scared of presets. A lot of times stock plugins especially, they have all these presets that are great to learn from. It's not something that you can just set and forget, but if you're compressing a bass guitar and you have no idea what the attack or release settings should be, start with a preset first and then you can tweak it to whatever you need it to be. Tip number 35 is you do the old car check. So most of us, when we're listening to music, is actually in our car. And so why do we always go to the car whenever we're checking our mixes? It's not because the car sounds better, even though it is kind of a lot more acoustically treated than some of our bedrooms are. The car check is going to be familiar to us. So you've been listening to music either on the radio or through your Bluetooth. You've been listening to it when you're driving around. You're spending sometimes hours a day driving in a car. You know what that car sounds like. So check your mixes, put them on the cloud like Google Drive, and then go to your car and listen to it through your speakers. You'll be able to get a sense of, am I making the right decision? Do the car check. Tip number 36 is that you record in stereo. This is not for everyone, but if you do have two microphones and maybe two of the same microphone, like even two SM57s, if you're recording acoustic guitar, take both of them and just try recording in stereo for once. A lot of times we just want to record in mono because that's more convenient. There are a lot more problems you can have when you're recording in stereo, but why not just go ahead and give it a try? Find two of the same microphone. They don't have to be like a matched pair. But two of the same microphone and try to space them out a little bit and listen to it. It's gonna sound more ambient and it's gonna sound more natural. So as often as you can, record in stereo if possible. Tip number 37 is that you leave your faders for last. It's gonna be tempting to grab the faders and start moving around right from the get-go. And that can be a good thing to kind of get you an overall ready to go mix. But my way is working from top down. So I've got the beginning of the track. I want to gain stage that track. I want to cut, compress, and boost like I mentioned earlier. And then I'll get to the fader moves because the fader moves don't mean anything if you haven't taken care of the initial stuff first. Tip number 38 is that you make use of bus tracks or bus groups. So in my drums mixing, for instance, I have kick, snare, two toms, and two overheads. Sometimes we can go up as high as 8. You can include room mics or snare bottom. Well, if I want the drums to be a little bit louder in my mix, I can just go to my drums bus and make one simple fader move. Rather than going to 8 individual tracks, I'm making moves on the bus. A bus is essentially you're taking all these individual tracks, you're sending them to one area, you're filtering them all down to one. And you can have as many buses as you want. You could have a drums bus, you can have a percussion bus, you can have guitar buses, are great to have. You got a lot of electric guitar tracks, you need to have a bus for all those guitars. Then you can funnel your buses into buses. So you have drums, guitars, and synths all going into a music bus. Your music bus goes to your mix bus, and then your mix bus goes to your main output. I highly recommend you get started using buses, specifically a music bus, a vocals bus, and then those two going to your mix bus. Just getting started. Tip number 39 is pretty similar to 38, but it's just called packing folders. So when you're recording, packing folders is particularly good to have because it's gonna make your session just look a little bit cleaner. It's gonna be easier to navigate, especially if you have 20, 30 tracks. You can take some of those tracks like the drums and just pack them into a folder. Now a folder is not really gonna change the sound of anything. You don't do a lot of processing on folders, but it just makes the screen look a lot cleaner when you're trying to navigate sessions. Tip number 40 is details. Details matter. And by details, what I mean is naming your tracks, adding details like notes as to how you recorded the tracks. You never know when you're gonna open up a session or have to send a session off to someone else. In the notes section, you can typically put things like, we had to record this on a rainy day, or there's some annoying frequencies at 2 kilohertz. Make use of the notes to share information with other people. And then also as you're recording, you don't want to have things say track 01, track 02, track 03. Give names to your tracks and try to add notes whenever it's appropriate. Tip number 41 is that you use the solo button to correct errors. So a lot of times you're not going to get recommended that you use the solo button. I use the solo function all the time when I'm mixing because when I solo, I'm not listening to 30 tracks all at once. I'm just listening to that one individual track. So if I hear something that's buzzing, the only way I'm going to find out what's buzzing is if I solo my tracks individually. Then you can isolate what the problems are, you can fix it, and then of course you want to listen to things in context of the rest of the mix. Tip number 42 is all about parallel processing. So parallel processing is where we can, just like with the bus situation, we can create a bus called parallel drums. Parallel compression is a very popular one that you can make use of. I've got some videos on my channel on this as well, but essentially what we're doing is when we're parallel processing, we're outputting to a bus, like a drums bus, but then we're also sending a signal to another bus that's getting blended in with that drums bus. Parallel processing, you can usually use a lot of distortion and go crazy with some wicked plugins and then just blend in a little bit of that signal. So it's all about mixing. So you have almost like a dry wet situation if you're familiar with like guitar recording in such a way. But parallel processing can be used for all sorts of things. In my recent drum video, I took things like my snare drum and I split my snare drum into 3 different buses. I had my snare crack, snare fat, and snare buzz, okay? So I could isolate individual frequencies, blend those together, and in a way that's like parallel processing. Tip number 43 is that you mix in mono. you need to at least at some point go over to your main fader and click the mono button so that you can check your mix. It sounds very good to have things panned out nice and wide, but if you shrink it down to mono and things start sounding really, really bad, you might have problems with phase, and you're not gonna find out about those problems unless you switch to mono. So it's just a button, usually on the DAW. You just go from having a stereo mix to a mono mix, and then you can switch it right back to stereo. Tip number 44 is that you automate. This is something that I don't really personally do a lot, but you at least automating on the choruses. You can use automation to make your choruses come out a little bit louder, and then your verses be a little bit quieter. Your bridges can be louder as well. You can go crazy with automation. You can automate EQ moves. You can have an EQ that comes in that cuts all the low end out on your keyboard, and then on the chorus, it opens it back up. Make use of automation whenever it's appropriate. Tip number 45, also very controversial, but don't update. So when your software, particularly Apple or Windows, when they want to update to the latest version, I highly recommend that you don't update to the latest version until a few months have passed. You don't want to be a guinea pig for any of the companies that are trying to push the latest version of their software. Try to hold on as long as you can. If your job is dependent on it, I can understand that you need to update to the latest version, but it can cause a lot of problems when you update your operating system on your computer. But then if your DAW is not going to update to that recent version, you can be in quite a pickle. So try to hold off on as many updates as you can. Tip number 46 is that less is more. This one speaks for itself. If you're somebody that likes to have infinite amount of tracks, maybe a good challenge for you is that you condense everything down to 24 tracks. Even if that just means taking things like tambourines, shakers, claps, merging them into what would be like a percussion track. Try to squish as many things together as possible, because when you're going to mix and you're looking at 80 tracks, it can be overwhelming, and then you start cutting corners. Try to simplify things in your life. Give yourself a limit and say, I'm gonna try to do this next session in 32 tracks. I'm gonna try to do this next session in 24 tracks and see what happens. Tip number 47 is make use of templates. A lot of times DAWs have templates built in that you can try out. People also have templates online that you can check out. Maybe your favorite mixer or artist is using templates. You can also save your own sessions as a template. So if you have a song that you really enjoyed mixing, you like the results of it, a lot of times you can go up, like in Studio One, you can go up to File and then Save as New Template. So when you go to start a new session or a new song, you can actually open up all of your plugins and track settings as if you're just picking up from the old one. So make use of templates. Tip number 48 is that you incorporate other people's opinions. So I am married, and my wife pretty regularly can listen to mixes that I'm working on, songs that I'm working on. Find somebody or get a group of friends that can give you feedback on how your mixing is going or how your production is going. If you're not willing to listen to what other people have to say or have to think about your recent project, then it may not be ready for public release. So have a group of people that you value their feedback and listen to what they have to say. Tip number 49 is that experience outweighs tools. This is a very hard lesson because we all like spending money. We all like scrolling through Sweetwater and seeing what the latest gear is, but I can tell you that experience is always going to win out. If you don't know how to use your plugins, like I was mentioning the stock ones, it's not going to do you a lot of good to go and start buying a bunch of UAD or expensive plugins for your mixing. Learn how to do the basics, get that experience under your belt, record a few songs. You can always go back and re-release your songs, especially if you're like Taylor Swift. Just redo the song in the future. But for now, get as much experience as you can, and then you'll start to learn along the way what you actually need as far as tools to make the job easier. The last tip I have for you is that the vocal is always priority. So whether you're mixing or recording, as soon as you can get a vocal in place, that thing needs to be prominent and have preeminence above everything else. Because in modern mixing, we all like to know what's going on with the vocal. This can be very difficult. If you're a drummer, you probably favor the drums and you might make the drums too loud. If you're a guitar player, you're probably going to favor the guitar. You want to hear more guitars, but the vocal needs to always be first and foremost. The vocal is always king, vocal is always queen. So put that first and foremost, and your mixes should sound a whole lot more professional. Well, that took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take, but I hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Chris Green. That was 50 music production tips. For more content just like this, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.